Welcome to the Stray Pointers podcast, where seemingly ordinary people join us for extraordinary discussions. You're listening to Season 2, Episode 12 of the Stray Pointers podcast. This episode was recorded on May 16th, 2024. I'm your host, Jim Lawless. For more information about the show, including the show notes for this episode, please visit straypointers.com. Rejoining the show tonight is horror novelist Angela Sylvaine. Angela, welcome back to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Glad to be back.
So we last spoke on the podcast on October 19th, 2023, which is almost to the day 7 months ago. And your first book, Frostbite, had just come out.
Yes, that's right.
So it was still kind of, I think the whole process was still a bit new. You were doing some publicity appearances and things like that. What's happened in the last 7 months?
Well, it's been going pretty well. I think as we talked about the first time, I published Frostbite through what we would refer in the industry as a small publisher or an indie publisher, because it can be real hard to get into those big publishing houses like Random House and Penguin and things like that. And so one of the goals I had along with the publisher was to try and sell 1,000 copies in the first year. That was like kind of a milestone for us.
Mm-hmm.
And we've already surpassed 1,200 copies in just about 7 months. So yeah, it's going great. I've been making the goals as far as the sales goals, and the reviews have been really positive. People seem to be really enjoying my brand of wacky, gory horror. So I'm excited about that.
So I saw your review in Locus magazine, which I don't know if it still is, but it had been a print publication, and it was kind of a kind of an upscale thing
Yeah.
to appear in a review in Locus, and it was a very positive review.
Yeah, I was super excited about that. Locus is a very highly respected, kind of mostly science fiction focused publication, which Frostbite is kind of a sci-fi horror comedy, so it's got elements of science fiction for sure. So yeah, that was a huge thing for me to appear in Locus magazine. Yeah.
You were reviewed there by Alex Brown, who's done some other reviews. And I'll tell you, between his review and some that I read on Goodreads, he said that Angela Sylvaine's Frostbite reminded him of The Faculty or Tremors. And
Yeah.
another reviewer said that that Frostbite was equivalent to The Thing for a younger audience. And I assume they're talking about the more recent or the 80s-ish John Carpenter film.
Yes, that's what I assume. Yeah.
See, this didn't occur to me when we were talking about this last time, but you had picked out a soundtrack for your book. You've got a playlist to go along with your book
I do.
to add some thematic texture as you're going along in these chapters. And I noticed that all these reviewers are not comparing it to other literary works, but they're comparing it to film.
Yeah, that's right.
Did you intend for this to read like a film?
I don't know that I intended it, but I do think that's what my writing style is. I think probably because I came to writing a little later in life, like in my 30s, my influences, as far as maybe where I picked up my storytelling style, even though I'm a big reader, I find when I write, I tend to write cinematically, and maybe that's also just because that's how my mind works. When I write, I see what's happening in my mind, and I tend to write scenes that are like action packed and, would be appropriate in more of a horror movie format. So, yeah, I think that I didn't necessarily intend it, but apparently that is just kind of my writing style. And I love a soundtrack as well. I'm a big fan of music. So to me, it kind of goes hand in hand to think of it cinematically and have kind of that soundtrack. So, yeah, maybe not intentional, but it seems to happen.
So have you thought about turning this into a screenplay?
I would love to. I'm actually going to be trying to kind of teach myself how to write screenplays and scripts. I do have like a representation for film and TV. So though it's a long shot always, to get into something like that, I do have a manager who shops around my work, both my short stories and my book, to different production companies and screenwriters and things like that. So that'd be a dream. Maybe someday. I would love it if that happened.
When you're writing these stories, do you picture actors that you would cast in the various roles?
Sometimes, but I find maybe because of my generation, I picture actors that were of that age when I was a teen. So I don't really have, I would say, like a good grasp of modern actors. So I wouldn't be very good at, if someone asked me, who would you cast in this? I probably wouldn't offer very good suggestions because they'd all be like in their 40s now and wouldn't be appropriate to play the roles in the book.
Okay,
So I probably need to get a little more caught up on modern actors that would be appropriate.
fair enough. Can you discuss in marketing and publicizing the book what has worked and what hasn't?
Yeah, I definitely do a lot of social media, and I think on pretty much all everywhere, TikTok and Twitter and Instagram and all those things. And I think it does take a little trial and error to figure out the right balance of posting enough, but not too much, and also posting about your work, but not too much. No one wants to feel like they're being sold to all the time, right? So I try to just be genuine on social media and talk about my work sometimes, maybe like once a week or something. But the other time, just talk about other stuff I like. So books I'm reading, movies I'm watching, shows I'm watching, food. I like to talk about food because I'm a big foodie. I post about my cats, just like who I am as a real person. Um, like you're interacting with friends, which, I do have a ton of friends online that I've never met. We've just bonded over social media. Um, so I think that's kind of what's worked for me is to form like, real relationships with people and just be genuine and try not to be too salesy. And then I've also have tried a little bit of advertising here and there, just in cheap forms. So little Facebook ads or Instagram ads or boosting TikTok posts, things like that I'll do every once in a while, but I try not to spend too much money on it, just because I am an independent author. So it's not like I have a big budget, nor does my publisher. So I keep it pretty kind of grassroots with social media, and it seems to have gone pretty well.
Okay. I noticed well, at least in the early stages of your of Frostbite, you were making a number of public appearances.
That's right. Yeah.
How many of those have you done to promote the book?
Oh, it's hard to say. I've done several book signings at like different local bookstores. I attend a big horror conference every year and I'll appear on panels and things to kind of promote myself or whatever the topics are. I do public readings at those conferences. This year, I'm actually also going to be teaching at a conference. So I'm going to be teaching at a conference here in Colorado for writers that want to learn how to write horror. So I have taught a couple classes before, and I'll be teaching this year at a conference. So, all told, I'm probably averaging once a month or something doing some kind of a public appearance, which has worked pretty well. And then also online things as well, of course, that aren't local. So yeah, I try to get out there. And if nothing else, doing readings in public and stuff, I think is important because a lot of writers, myself included, and just people in general, have a kind of a natural aversion to public speaking. There's a reason why it's the greatest fear above death, even. I've heard people are like, I'd rather die than speak in public.
I think
Um,
you've got the source for a future novel.
so doing those kind of things also just keeps it so that you don't get too anxious, kind of practice makes perfect.
what does this do to your personal time? Because I know that between social media alone can take up time.
Yeah.
Traveling to and from, even in town
Yeah.
bookstores, has to be time consuming. What does this do to your personal time?
Oh, it's definitely like, I mean, I think of it as a second job, you know? So when you think of it that way, you're kind of like carving out time. You're going to work on this that's like a job. And but also limiting it in appropriate ways, right? So I sort of carve out certain times of day that I'm going to work on social media. Like I usually do a little bit right away in the morning. Kind of like right after I get up, I'll do a little bit of social media and then I can kind of put it away for most of the day. I might do something on my lunch break or something, just so it doesn't interfere. And then I'll do a little bit in the evening or on weekends. Same thing with events and actual writing time. I just kind of think of it scheduling it out so that it doesn't interfere with sort of the personal time I have allotted for, dinner and after dinner, and weekend plans, that kind of thing. I just try not to let it interfere. hmm But I have had to kind of make some choices. Like before I was really being a professional writer, I would say I actually did more nonprofit volunteering. Like I was on like a couple of boards and different things like that. I've sort of had to scale that back because I had to make a choice of what I'm going to spend my time on.
Okay.
So definitely there are times when something has to give.
Truth be told, I haven't read your book yet. I have the attention span of a hummingbird and a stack of unread books taller than you. So I'll get to it eventually. Horror is really not my genre. So I did read Alex Brown's review though, and one of the things that he focused on was I think he seemed to focus on this as a young adult's novel, which I didn't think it was aimed strictly at young adults, but there might have been something about the makeup of the cover that might have given him that impression. But he had commented on the amount of violence and gore in the book that it would probably not be appropriate for young adults. So I'm curious, has that amount of written violence and gore, has that unnerved close friends and family?
For the most part, no, because most people kind of know what they're getting into. Like I'll give them a warning, and I always give people a pass. Horror is not for everyone, and I'm a big proponent of read what you like. There should never be any pressure to read what you don't like. Life is too short. And I also have a TBR pile that's so tall, it will probably someday tumble over and be what kills me. Um,
There's another
so,
book.
you know what? Like, no one should feel obligated to read anything that is not their style. And I tell my family that too. Like, my mom, I know her tolerances. And so I tell her, like, you can be proud of me and buy a copy of my book and I will sign it for you, but you won't like it. Please don't open it and read it. It's just simply not for you. And that's okay. So I think that's totally fine. And largely, though, I do have family members who are fans of horror that loved it,
Oh,
family
good.
and friends. And I think related to the young adult versus not conversation, that's a tough one because there's just a lot of debate in the writing world about what makes something young adult and what doesn't. There's just a lot of debate about that
Now
because
you said last time that you, when you were a young adult, had picked up novels that you
yeah,
possibly shouldn't have,
yeah.
but your parents didn't really
No.
police what you were reading. So, do you think of that when you're writing, or if I don't know that you're actually writing this for a young adult, but if you were to write young adult horror fiction, would you take that into consideration, your past experiences? I'm assuming there was some shock that happened sometime in your youth while you were reading.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly we can learn from those things. Like I read a lot of Stephen King when I was young, and there's one of the first books I probably read was It, which is about a killer clown. And it is very much, I think it actually is suitable for young adult audiences in some ways because it's kind of about a band of kids that unite to fight a monster. So it's very much a coming of age story, which is a story that resonates with people of that age. But there's also some content in there that's probably crossing the line. Where if I were writing it, and actually Stephen King himself gets a little flack for one particular scene where in retrospect, there's some sexual content essentially that people now have said, that's maybe not appropriate for kids of that age to be like involved in. So I think, yeah, that's kind of a learning. Like in retrospect, even though he didn't write that book for kids, I don't think he would categorize that book that way. A lot of that age group was reading it. And even adults who were reading it are now saying, this I probably could have done without. So yeah, we learn and grow. And I think though still being someone who is of a generation that we weren't monitored very much, there's also something to be said for kind of self-monitoring, right? I don't think that age group is incapable of putting something down, right? They're just like adults,
That's
where you're
fair.
reading it and you're like, this just isn't for me. It's not my style, or I just kind of don't like the direction it's going. Maybe we just don't give people enough credit to do that on their own, which I think they're really capable of.
Sure.
Mhm.
So what unexpected things have happened because of the book?
Well, I had kind of a recent one. So I actually went on a couple of other podcasts recently because I'm kind of on my,
What?
I know I'm sorry. I'm cheating on you with other podcasts. Um, but I went on a couple of other podcasts because I'm kind of in my podcast promo phase of launching my new book. Um, but a couple of the ones I've gone on are ones where like literally heroes of mine have appeared. Um, so like I went on this podcast called Books in the Freezer, which has featured many of my favorite authors, like Stephen Graham Jones and some authors I just really love. So to be in the same like virtual room with those people is pretty incredible. The other one I can think of is it hasn't come out yet, but I was on this podcast called Who's There, which is a movie podcast. You talk about your favorite movies. And they just had an episode with Mike Flanagan, who's a very popular filmmaker, like popular, probably one of the most popular directors right now, and one of my favorite directors. So being in that situation, having that opportunity to have conversations in the same virtual room where those people have been is pretty cool.
Very good. So there's a nice segue into talking about your new book. So you have a new book. You mentioned it last time you're on the show. I believe the title is The Dead Spot: Stories of Lost Girls. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. And it comes out Tuesday, May 21st, which I'm not sure when this episode will air. So it will either have just come out or maybe not come out yet. We'll see. Um, and it's a short story collection. So it is different than my first book. It's also, I would say, darker in tone. It's not a comedy. So it's a little more melancholy. And it's 17 stories of women and girls fighting monsters, ghosts, obsession, manipulation, and just the darkness in the world around them. So it's kind of these tales of women and girls that kind of captures the essence of the battles that they might fight, but made a little more fantastical.
Is there a reason for the different tone?
I think when I write short fiction, it actually tends to be a little darker. And when I write long fiction, it tends to get a little more cinematic and and like wittier and funnier. And I think maybe that's because longer stuff to me in my mind is a little more like a movie. And also, if I'm spending more time in that world, I don't know that I could maintain the level of darkness. Essentially, if I'm going to be living in a world, because a novel can sometimes take like a year. And so it's probably a little easier for me as well to exist in that world with a little comic relief. Whereas a shorter work is kind of like a short, sharp punch, you know? I can get a little darker faster, and I'm only really in that world or working on that for maybe a day or a week or a month.
I believe you got up and coming writer J.A.W. McCarthy to do the foreword. I shouldn't say you got J.A.W. McCarthy to do the foreword. J.A.W. McCarthy has done the foreword for this new book. How did
Yeah.
that come about?
Well, I'm very lucky to actually call her a friend. We met through writing circles and have become friends. And I'm a huge fan of her work. She's an award-winning author of short fiction. And so essentially, I asked her if she would consider it. And I was very lucky that she said yes. And truly, I was, because she is someone I respect so much and is so talented. Um, when she wrote the foreword and I read it, like I almost cried because she said really nice things, and it was just a huge honor to have her write that. So, yeah, it was a pretty big deal.
When you're working on the dead spot, were you able to apply any lessons learned during the writing and publishing of Frostbite to that, or did you already? It sounded like you pretty much had the manuscript together when we last talked. So I would imagine it would have just been the post-writing pieces and marketing and things like that that you would have been working on. But was there anything that you learned through the Frostbite process that you were able to apply to what you were doing with the dead spot?
Yeah, I think you're right. Most of it was written, but probably what I applied was sort of around kind of like arc. So there's something we talk about as writers related to the story arc and the character arcs in a book. You want things to kind of have a natural up and down, and you want to see characters and plot sort of change over time. And I think you can do that with short story collections too. So that's probably where I applied those lessons, is around the order in which which stories I chose, and the order in which I put them to kind of create a flow and an arc for the reader, so that not only does each individual story have kind of its own arc, but they flow together in a way that tells kind of a larger story.
So you talked on the last time you appeared on the show about Frostbite being a part of, you didn't call it a trilogy, but a three-part series.
Yeah,
But you have something else coming out in the interim, or something else that you're planning in the interim. You've got another book that
I do.
you're planning to publish. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So I had published a novella, which is just a shorter work, a couple of years ago, and it's actually out of print. So my publisher, who did Frostbite and the Dead Spot, asked if I would like to re-release it, but expand it. So I had the opportunity to take this novella, which is called Chopping Spree, and it's a retro 80s mall slasher. And so I got to do some of the horror comedy again, and take this thing I had worked on years ago and just expand it and make it bigger, which was a lot of fun. It's about this town in Minnesota that's known for two things: an awesome retro 80s shopping mall and a slew of disappearances of teens that hasn't been solved. And the main character, Penny, gets a job, her first job at this awesome mall. And she's mostly concerned about impressing her cool new friends, but also she's starting to have doubts about the town's official story about these disappearances. So that's something that's on her mind. And one night at the mall after closing, they're kind of trapped there with this masked killer. So this masked killer shows up, and they're having to escape this slasher guy. But also, like, as they're doing this, some things start to come out about the secrets the town is keeping. So we find out a little more about that as well. So that's kind of what it's about. And it comes out in September, on September 24th.
Have you finished writing the manuscript for this? Is it all ready to
I
go?
have. Yep, it's all complete. We've got a cover and everything. So everything is done. It's available for pre-order directly from the publisher but we're just waiting on a couple last kind of things, and then it'll go up for pre-order everywhere probably in July.
Now, is this also through Dark Matter?
It is, yeah.
What about the next Frostbite book? And I don't know if I should call it Frostbite book. Is there a particular name you have in mind for the series of three?
Not yet. I haven't figured that out yet. So I've been calling it casually just Frostbite 2 as well. And it will be coming out. I'm working on it now, and it will be coming out in October of 2025. And it's going to be, you're right, it's planned to be a 3-book series. And this one will be taking place during spring break, which is a very 90s thing. It's set in the 90s. Spring break was a time during the 90s when spring break was like, MTV spring break. But since we're in North Dakota and it's cold still during that time of year, we're actually going to be heading up to Winnipeg, Canada. So it'll be a cold, wintry spring break with more hijinks and aliens.
So you got an actual city this time.
Yeah, this one is in a real place as
Very
opposed
good.
to a place.
Very good. Very good. And do you have plans for I mean, do you know what your third novel is going to entail?
I have some ideas, yes.
Okay.
So I have some kind of loose outlines for them, but I definitely trust my gut when I'm writing too. So often plans change.
Sure. So has writing all these books, writing and publishing all these books, has this opened any doors for you?
I think on the writing side of things, for sure. The more you write and you get your name out there, the more you meet other people in the industry. So I think mainly the doors it's opened is probably more writing opportunities in the future. So just kind of continuing to expand my career as a writer.
Okay. So what's on the horizon in 2024 and into 2025 for Angela Sylvaine?
Well, I'll have a couple more short stories coming out that I'll have more details up about as I have them. But I'm still trying to kind of pepper in some short work. And then, yeah, Chopping Spree in September. And then in 2025, Frostbite. And hopefully more to come. I'm working on other book ideas. And once I finish Frostbite 2, I'll start another novel that I haven't quite decided. I have a couple of ideas. So we'll see what I work on next, but hopefully more to come.
Any other media other than the printed word?
Possibly. Well, it depends, I guess. If my manager can find me like good opportunities, we'll see. I'm always like in the market for adaptations for sure. And this is printed, but I also have an opportunity to potentially learn how to write graphic novels. So I would love at some point to adapt some of my stories to be comics. That would be area I would love to pursue, and I really love horror comics. So hopefully in the future I can do something like that too.
That would be great. I'd read those as soon as they came out then.
Okay, I'll let you know.
Is there anything we didn't cover that you'd like to talk about?
I don't think so. This has been a lot of fun.
Good.
I would love catching up with you.
So you mentioned you weren't sure when this episode's going to come out. It's either going to come out Thursday night, the 16th, as we're recording this, or
Right?
sometime Friday the 17th. So your new book, The Dead Spot, Stories of Lost Girls, that comes out on Tuesday. It's available for pre-order from various publishers, big ones,
It is, yeah.
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, that sort of thing.
Yep.
The links to all of this will be in the show notes for this episode. Well, I think that's about it. Thank you very much for being on again. We're going to have you on at least 3 more times. Now,
Great.
Chopping Spree, just from the name, I am probably going to want to read that. I don't know if
Yeah,
it's going to be humorous or not, but
it is going to be humorous. Yep. It's like, if you like those classic kind of 80s cheesy horror movies,
mhm.
this is definitely in that vein.
A Stranger Things kind of vibe.
Totally. Yeah. Stranger Things kind of vibe. Frostbite has that too. If you like that, you'll definitely like it. It has a soundtrack as well. So I try to keep the music flowing through. So if you like 80s music, you'll see some of that in there too.
Very good. Well, thanks again and good luck.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Let's do this again soon. Take care.